Single mum shamed for taking sick son to hospital without insurance. But a millionaire steps in and does something that shocks everyone. Comment giving a rating from 0 to 10 to my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain lashed against the windows of the county hospital in the sprawling metropolis when the 28-year-old single mother pushed through the glass doors in desperation. Her brown hair plastered to her wet face, and her simple clothes dripped water onto the waxed floor. In her arms, she carried the most precious treasure of her life, a 4-year-old boy whose pale face and bluish lips had terrified her for 3 consecutive days. The fever wouldn't break, a roller coaster of temperatures, spiking and dipping like a cruel ride, leaving the child listless, whimpering softly between moments of delirium. She had tried everything within her reach: cold compresses, basic medications bought with the last of her money, home remedies that her elderly neighbor had taught her. Nothing worked. She rushed through the cold white corridors, following the signs to the pediatric emergency reception. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the floor, echoing her urgency through the hallways that smelled of disinfectant and suffering. The boy weighed heavier with each step, his small, hot body burning against her chest like embers. At the reception desk, a middle-aged nurse looked at her over her glasses with a weary expression. Her eyes quickly scanned the young mother's wet and simple clothes, making a silent assessment that needed no words. "Insurance?" she asked in a monotonous voice, not even looking at the child who was struggling to breathe. "I don't have any," she replied, trying to control the tremor in her voice. "But my son is very sick. He needs urgent care." The nurse sighed with irritation, as if this situation were a personal inconvenience. "Without insurance, it's through the public system. The line is back there. It could take a few hours." "A few hours?" The mother's voice came out louder than she intended. "Look at him. He's had a high fever for 3 days. He can't even keep his eyes open." "Mom, don't yell at me. The rules are clear. No insurance or private payment. It's the regular line. Next." The humiliation burned on the young woman's cheeks as if someone had slapped her. She knew this look of judgment well, this automatic presumption that, because she was young, alone, and visibly poor, she must be irresponsible or a freeloader. She had faced similar situations countless times since becoming a single mother. It was in this moment of despair and humiliation that a male voice, deep and firm, cut through the tense air of the reception area. "Excuse me." She turned and saw a man of about 30 approaching, tall, broad shoulders filling out the dark, custom-tailored suit perfectly. His leather shoes gleamed even under the artificial light of the hospital, and the watch on his wrist probably cost more than she earned in 2 years. Everything about him screamed wealth and power, from his confident posture to the impeccable cut of his dark hair. "What's the problem here?" he asked, addressing the nurse directly, but his eyes quickly turned to the child in the mother's arms. "Sir, this woman doesn't have insurance, and—" "I didn't ask about insurance," he interrupted, with an authority that made the nurse straighten her spine. "I asked what the problem is. I see a child clearly in critical condition." The single mother watched the scene without fully understanding what was happening. The elegant man turned to her with eyes that showed genuine concern. "How long has he been like this?" 3 days with a very high fever," she replied, still suspicious. "I've tried everything at home, but it's not getting any better." Without hesitation, the millionaire turned back to the nurse, taking a leather wallet from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. "I want this child to be seen immediately by the best pediatric team available. All costs are on me." The nurse completely changed her demeanor, the hostile tone giving way to exaggerated courtesy. "Of course, sir. I'll call the doctor immediately." "If you could come with me." "No," said the single mother, surprising everyone. "I can't accept this." The millionaire looked at her with curiosity, not used to having his help rejected. "Your child needs urgent medical care." "And I know that better than anyone," she replied. her wounded pride fighting against her maternal desperation. "But I don't accept charity. I don't know you. I don't know what your intentions are." For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. He saw fierce determination in her eyes, a strength that impressed him. She saw something she didn't expect to find in the eyes of a man clearly used to getting everything he wanted. Respect. "It's not charity," he said softly. "It's what any decent person would do seeing a child suffering." The boy whimpered softly, and that sound broke the mother's heart. All her defenses, all her pride, crumbled before the cruel reality. Her son needed help she couldn't offer. "All right," she whispered, tears finally escaping her eyes. "But it's a loan. I'll pay you back every penny." The smile he gave her was warm and without condescension. "Whatever you wish." The next few hours passed like a blur. Tests, doctors whispering in medical jargon, medications administered through syringes and IVs. The millionaire didn't leave the hospital, remaining in the waiting room, even when the doctors assured him that the worst was over and that the child was responding well to treatment. When they were finally able to see the boy already stable in the pediatric room, she approached the man who had saved her son. "Why did you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe us anything." He was silent for a long moment, looking through the window at the city that stretched out below. "I lost my parents very young," he finally said. "I know what it's like to feel alone against the world, to need help and not know where to find it." It was the first time she had seen him vulnerable, and something stirred inside her chest. There was more to this man than obvious wealth and power. "How can I thank you?" "You don't need to thank me. Just let me visit the boy during his recovery. I want to make sure he's okay." She hesitated. Accepting his financial help had already been difficult enough. Allowing him to become more involved in their lives was uncharted and dangerous territory. "I promise I have no ulterior motives," he said, reading her hesitation. "I'm just someone who cares." Against her better judgment, she nodded. She didn't know that this decision would completely change the course of her life, nor that the man standing beside her carried secrets that would soon transform gratitude into something much more complicated and impossible to ignore. For the next 5 days, the millionaire appeared at the hospital religiously, always in the late afternoon after business hours, carrying small gifts for the boy, a teddy bear, storybooks, educational toys that cost more than she earned in a month working as a cleaning lady in office buildings. At first, she remained distant and formal, thanking him politely, but creating invisible barriers between them. She didn't want him to think she was trying to take advantage of the situation or that his visits were welcome beyond basic courtesy. But there was something in the way he interacted with her son that melted her defenses. The rich man didn't feign interest in the child. He sat on the floor of the hospital room, not caring about his expensive suit, and listened patiently to the confused stories the boy told about his favorite cartoons. He laughed genuinely at the corny jokes of a 4-year-old and showed real interest when the little one explained how his toy cars worked. "Do you have children?" she asked on the 3rd day, watching him help the boy put together a puzzle. "No," he replied, without taking his eyes off the colorful pieces. "I've never had time for family. I've always been too busy building my business." "What kind of business?" There was an almost imperceptible pause before he answered. "Real estate development. Commercial buildings. Mostly." She nodded, without imagining that this casual information would become a bombshell in her life. At that moment, she was more interested in the way his hands, clearly accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts, delicately moved the small pieces of the toy so as not to frustrate a child. As the days passed, the conversations between them became longer and more personal. He learned that she had lost her parents in a car accident when she was 19, being left alone in the world exactly when she found out she was pregnant. The boy's father had disappeared the moment he found out about the pregnancy, leaving her with debts, no family, and a baby on the way. "That's why it's so hard to accept help," she admitted one afternoon when the boy was sleeping peacefully. "I've learned that I can only count on myself." "I understand," he said, and she realized that he really did. "I was also left alone very young. The difference is that I got lucky in business." "Lucky?" She laughed without humor. "Rich men always talk about luck as if money falls from the sky." "You're right," he admitted, surprising her. "It wasn't luck. It was obsessive work. 16 hours a day for years, sacrificing everything that could have given me real happiness." There was a melancholy in his voice that she didn't expect. Looking at him at that moment, she didn't see the powerful millionaire, but a man who seemed as lonely as she was. On the 5th day, when they were discharged from the hospital, he insisted on paying for a taxi to take them home. During the ride, she watched as he looked out the window at the neighborhoods that became progressively poorer as they moved away from downtown. "You've never been to this part of town, have you?" she asked. "No," he admitted without embarrassment. "I live in a bubble. Downtown apartment, office in a commercial building, expensive restaurants." I didn't know this reality. When they arrived at the housing project where she lived, he offered to help with the bags of medicine and toys. She hesitated, but the boy was already pulling his hand, eager to show his own toys at home. The 2-room apartment was impeccably clean, but impossible to disguise the poverty. Old furniture, but well cared for. Curtains patched with care. A small, old television that worked with an antenna. Everything organized with the love and dedication of someone who transformed very little into a cozy home. He made no comments about the modesty of the place. On the contrary, he sincerely praised the creative decoration and the feeling of home that the apartment conveyed. "Are you hungry?" she asked, not really knowing why she was inviting him to stay. "If it's not a bother." She prepared a simple dinner: rice, beans, shredded chicken, and salad. Homemade food, seasoned by someone who learned to cook out of necessity but discovered a talent in the process. They ate sitting at the small kitchen table, the boy chattering excitedly about his new toys. "This is the best meal I've had in years," he said, and she realized that he wasn't being polite, he was being honest. "That can't be. You must go to the best restaurants in the city." "I do, but always alone, always thinking about work. I've never..." He looked around, at the boy playing on the floor, at her serving more rice on his plate with domestic naturalness. "I've never had this." There was something in the way he said "this" that made her heart race dangerously. He wasn't just talking about the food. After dinner, while she was giving the boy a bath, he stayed in the small living room, looking at the photos stuck on the refrigerator with colorful magnets. Photos of her pregnant, alone, but smiling. Photos of the boy as a baby, as a child, growing up in small moments, captured with a simple cell phone. A lifetime of love and struggle documented in homemade images. When she returned with the boy already in his pajamas, she found the millionaire standing in front of the window that overlooked the courtyard of the housing project, where some children were still playing under the light of the streetlights. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how different it would be to have grown up in a place like this," he said, "with neighbors who know each other, children playing in the street, mothers who care about each other." "Don't romanticize poverty," she said with a hint of irritation. "It's pretty from afar. When you have to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying medicine for your son, the perspective changes." "You're right," he said, turning to face her. "Sorry. I didn't mean to sound condescending." The sincerity of the apology disarmed her. She was used to constant defensiveness, always expecting judgment or pity. But he seemed genuinely interested in understanding her reality without romanticizing it or judging it. When it was time for him to leave, the boy insisted on giving a good-night kiss to Uncle, as he had begun to call him. Seeing the two together at the door, she felt something tighten in her chest. It was dangerous to allow her son to become fond of this man. It was dangerous to become fond herself. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked, the car keys already in his hand. She should have said no. She should have thanked him for everything and ended that situation there. But when she opened her mouth, it came out, "If you want." In the following days, the visits became routine. He always arrived in the late afternoon, sometimes bringing prepared dinners from expensive restaurants, other times settling for the simple food she prepared. They started watching movies together after the boy fell asleep, sitting on the small couch, maintaining a respectful distance, but increasingly difficult to ignore. One night, during an old romantic movie, she fell asleep, leaning on his shoulder. When she woke up 2 hours later, she found him still awake, just watching her sleep, with an expression that made her stomach churn with nervousness. "Sorry," she murmured, quickly moving away. "Don't be sorry," he said, his voice hoarser than usual. "You were tired." But they both knew there was more than just tiredness in that moment of involuntary intimacy. There was a growing tension between them, an attraction that was becoming harder to deny with each passing day. It was the following week that everything changed. She was organizing some old papers when she found her work permit that she hadn't opened in months. Flipping through the pages, her eyes fixed on the name of the last company where she had worked, Dream Builders, Inc., the same field he had mentioned, the same time she had been laid off. Her hands began to tremble as she connected the information. The company name was on some of the medicine bags he had brought. On the receipts, he had insisted on leaving with her for tax purposes. Dream Builders, Inc., his company, the company that had destroyed her life. The work permit trembled in her hands as if it were a bomb about to explode. Dream Builders, Inc. The letters seemed to burn her eyes as the memory of that terrible day came back in full force. The day she found out she was pregnant. The day she told her supervisor the news, radiant with happiness. The day she was fired 2 hours later under the flimsy excuse of company restructuring. 6 months of unemployment followed. 6 months trying to find work with a growing belly, facing disapproving looks and doors that slammed shut as soon as they mentioned her condition. The severance money quickly ran out between medical appointments and preparations for the baby. She had to sell everything she had of value, accept cleaning jobs paid by the day, go hungry some nights to ensure that the baby in her womb had adequate nutrition. And he knew. All along, he knew who she was. The anger she felt was so intense that she needed to sit down. It couldn't be a coincidence. Men like him didn't frequent county hospitals by chance. They weren't interested in poor single mothers by accident. Everything had been calculated, manipulated. When the doorbell rang that afternoon, she was already waiting. She opened the door with a stony face, holding the work permit like evidence of a crime. "Hi," he said, smiling and carrying a bag with new toys. "How are you both?" "Dream Builders, Inc., she said, showing him the work permit. The smile disappeared from his face instantly. For a moment, he seemed genuinely surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to find out. Then came recognition, followed by something that looked like panic. "I can explain! Can you?" Her voice was laden with bitter sarcasm. "Are you going to explain to me how the owner of the company that fired me while I was pregnant magically appears at the hospital when my son is sick? Are you going to explain to me how this wasn't planned from the beginning?" "It wasn't planned," he said, trying to enter the apartment, but she blocked his way. "I didn't know who you were when I saw you at the hospital." "Liar!" The word came out like a slap. "Men like you don't do anything by chance. How long have you been investigating me? How long have you been planning this whole charade?" "Listen," he said, his voice getting firmer. "I know how this looks, but I swear I didn't know. I only found out who you were a few days later, when I saw your name in the hospital records. And you didn't think it was important to tell me?" His silence was answer enough. "Where's Daddy?" asked the boy, appearing behind her in his pajamas, confused by the yelling. The innocent question was like a punch to her stomach. Without realizing it, she had allowed her son to start seeing this man as a father figure. Another cruel manipulation. "Uncle isn't coming here anymore," she said, trying to keep her voice calm so as not to scare the child. "But why?" The boy started crying, clinging to her leg. "Because he lied to Mommy." She slammed the door in the millionaire's face, ignoring his pleas from the other side. She hugged her crying son, who didn't understand why Uncle had suddenly left, and she herself had to fight back tears. She had been an idiot, completely idiotic. For a few weeks, she had allowed impossible dreams to blossom in her heart. She had imagined that maybe, just maybe, there was someone in the world who cared about her for who she was, not out of pity or manipulation. In the following weeks, he tried to contact her in every way possible. Phone calls she didn't answer, text messages she deleted without reading, flowers delivered to the door that she threw in the trash, letters she tore up without opening. The elderly neighbor who had become fond of his visits tried to intercede. "That young man seems sincere," she said. "Maybe you should listen to what he has to say." "Sincere?" She laughed bitterly. "He owns the company that fired me while I was pregnant. He left me in poverty, and now he shows up pretending to be my savior." "But he saved your boy." "Out of guilt. Guilt for what his company did to me." Even so, there were nights when she caught herself thinking about him. About the way he had played with her son, about the genuine interest he showed in her stories, about the way he looked at her as if she was someone special, not just another poor woman who needed charity. They were moments of weakness that she fought fiercely. She couldn't afford to trust again. She couldn't allow her son to get hurt more than he already had been. A month after the argument, she was coming back from work when she found the boy playing in the courtyard with a low fever again. It wasn't anything serious this time, just a common cold, but her heart raced with fear. The memories of the hospital, of the despair, of the feeling of powerlessness all came back at once. That night, after medicating her son and putting him to sleep, she allowed herself to cry for the first time since the discovery. She cried for the loneliness, for the difficulty of raising a child alone, for the anger she felt towards him, and for something she didn't want to admit. Longing. Longing for the conversations, for the feeling of having someone to share her worries with, for the way he made her feel interesting and valued, longing for not being completely alone in the world. It was during that night of tears and insomnia that she received an unexpected call. The number was unknown, but the voice on the other end made her freeze. "Hello? Is this the boy's mother?" It was a male voice she didn't recognize, but there was something familiar in the tone. "Who's speaking?" "I'm an engineer at Dream Builders, Inc. I work for the same boss you've been seeing." Her stomach clenched. How did this man know about the visits? "What do you want?" "I want to talk to you in person. I have information that may interest you about your layoff. About why you were really fired." "I know why I was fired." "Are you sure?" The man's voice carried a disturbing insinuation. "Because what I know suggests that your pregnancy was just a convenient excuse." Her heart started beating faster. "What kind of information?" "I can't talk on the phone, but I can tell you that your millionaire boss isn't as innocent as he seems, and you weren't the only one." The call ended abruptly, leaving her with more questions than answers. What other information could there be about her layoff? What else didn't she know about what had happened? And why, despite all the anger and distrust, did a part of her still hope that there was an explanation that would change everything? During the early hours of the morning, while watching her son sleep, she made a decision that she knew was dangerous. She needed to know the whole truth, even if that truth hurt her even more. She needed to understand what had really happened, who was really that man who had entered their lives like a hurricane. The next morning, she called the unknown number. "I agree to talk," she said when the man answered, "but it has to be in a public place." "Perfect," he said, and she could feel the smile in his voice. "I'm sure our conversation will open your eyes to many interesting things." The meeting took place at a busy diner downtown, far from the neighborhood where she lived. The man waiting for her was tall, thin, with dark hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. There was something about him that made her immediately uncomfortable, a falseness that emanated from every gesture. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit down. "I know you must be confused by all this." "Get to the point," she said, keeping her purse in her lap and her defenses on high alert. "What information do you have?" The man smiled, taking a folder from the table next to him. "First, let me introduce myself properly. I'm your son's father." The words hit her like a lightning bolt. The man who had disappeared from her life 5 years ago, who had denied paternity and fled when he found out about the pregnancy, was sitting in front of her as if nothing had happened. "You," she whispered, the shock making it difficult to form words. "I've been working at Dream Builders Inc. for 3 years, he continued, ignoring her shocked state. "I was recently promoted to chief engineer. Imagine my surprise when I found out that my boss was visiting my ex-girlfriend and my son." Her mind was racing, trying to process this impossible twist. "You knew I worked there?" "Of course I knew. In fact, I was the one who suggested your layoff when I found out about the pregnancy." The confession was said with a casual cruelty that made her feel physically sick. "Why?" "Because I didn't want problems. I was building my career. I couldn't have a pregnant ex-girlfriend blackmailing me or asking for child support. I never asked you for anything. But you could have. It was safer to get rid of the problem before it grew." She stood up from the table, trembling with anger, but he grabbed her arm. "Wait, I'm not finished yet. Now that my boss is interested in you, the situation has changed. I can make this very complicated for him, or for you. What do you want? Money, a generous amount to keep quiet about our story. Otherwise, I'll make it public that the millionaire benefactor is getting involved with an employee's ex-girlfriend, using the sick child as a pretext to seduce a vulnerable woman." The calculated malice of the plan left her speechless. He had planned everything meticulously, working at the millionaire's company, waiting for an opportunity, and now blackmailing both of them. "And if I refuse, then I'll tell the whole story to the press." I imagine his reputation wouldn't survive the scandal. Rich man taking advantage of a desperate single mother. The media loves that kind of story. At that moment, she understood that she had been a pawn in a much larger game than she had imagined. Both the millionaire and she had been manipulated by someone who knew them both and knew exactly how to use their vulnerabilities. "You have 2 days to get the money," he said, standing up. 500,000. Not bad to buy my permanent silence. After he left, she sat in the diner for more than an hour, trying to process everything she had discovered. Her layoff hadn't just been because of the pregnancy. It had been orchestrated by the child's own father, who was now returning to extort money using the situation he himself had created. Even more disturbing was realizing that the millionaire was probably innocent of everything she had assumed. He hadn't planned the meeting at the hospital. He hadn't investigated her life. Maybe, just maybe, his feelings were genuine. During the walk back home, she made the most difficult decision of her life. She needed to tell the millionaire everything, even if it meant admitting that she had judged him unfairly. That night, after putting the boy to sleep, she called the number that she had memorized from seeing it on her cell phone screen so much in recent weeks. "Hello?" His voice sounded surprised and hopeful. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent." They met in a park near her housing project. When she saw him approaching, she realized how much weight he had lost in recent weeks. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his posture didn't show the usual confidence. "Thank you for giving me a chance to explain," he said, sitting down on the bench next to her. "Actually, I'm the one who needs to explain," she said, surprising him, "and tell you something you need to know." Over the next hour, she recounted everything: the meeting with her son's father, the blackmail, the discovery that he had orchestrated her layoff. She saw the millionaire's face go through a range of emotions: surprise, anger, understanding, and finally determination. He's blackmailing me too, he revealed. He called earlier today demanding 500,000 to keep quiet about our relationship. Are you going to pay? No. The answer was firm and immediate. I'm not going to let him manipulate us anymore. But the scandal could destroy your company. Let it, he said, turning to face her. I don't care about the company anymore, about money or reputation. I only care about you and that boy. For the first time in weeks, she allowed a small hope to blossom in her chest. How can we stop him? With the truth, he said. We're going to expose all his manipulation before he can use it against us. In the following days, they worked together to gather evidence. The millionaire discovered that the engineer had manipulated documents to justify several layoffs of pregnant employees over the years, always with the same excuse of restructuring. There was a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. When they confronted the boy's father with the evidence, they offered him a choice: resign quietly and disappear forever, or face a lawsuit for discrimination and extortion. Faced with the prospect of prison and professional ruin, he chose the first option, signing documents that waived any rights to the child and committing to never contact them again. With the threat removed, they could finally focus on what really mattered, the feelings that had grown between them despite all the complications. "Can I ask you something?" she said one afternoon, while watching the boy play in the small park of the housing project. "Anything. Why did you really help me that day at the hospital?" He was silent for a long moment, looking at the child running among the toys. "Because when I looked at you too, I saw something I always wanted to have and never thought was possible. A family. Someone who cared about me for who I am, not for what I have. And now? Do you still want that?" In response, he knelt before her on the park bench, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" he asked, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "Not for money, not for convenience, but because I love you and want to spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve your trust." The tears that rolled down her face were of pure happiness. After years of struggling alone, she had found someone willing to fight alongside her. "Yes," she whispered, holding out her hand for him to place the ring on her finger. The boy, realizing something special was happening, ran to them shouting with joy when he learned that Uncle was going to become his new dad. 6 months later, they were married in a simple ceremony in the garden of the hospital where they met, surrounded only by people who really mattered. Some hospital staff who had followed the boy's recovery, neighbors from the housing project who had become chosen family, and the doctor who had saved the child's life. The millionaire had decided to transform his company into a cooperative, distributing the profits among all employees and implementing strict policies to protect labor rights. His fortune, built over years of solitary work, had finally found a greater purpose, taking care of the family he had chosen and helping other families in similar situations. She continued working not out of financial necessity, but because she had discovered that she had a talent for organization and management, gradually taking on administrative roles in the revamped company. At the end of that first year together, while watching her husband help her son with his homework at the kitchen table of their new house, she reflected on how life had changed. All the difficulties, all the suffering had led to this moment of peace and completeness. True love, she discovered, was not something that happened despite the difficulties, but because of them. It was what grew when two people decided to face the world together, turning scars into wisdom and loneliness into chosen family.